Pretty interesting stuff. Provides an updated list of wild and or widely available plants and fungi, which can give you free access to free nutrient-dense food each spring as the first signs of spring arrive, and maybe the second and third signs, and winter fades into the rearview mirror. Again, we did only have snow here a couple of weeks ago. Those of us who love to garden will likely be busy planting many of the crops that will sustain us for the rest of the year. That's right, foraging is a right-wing extremism. This time of year, after winter stores almost completely depleted and before this year's crops are ready, traditionally known as the hungry gap. Foraging for wild, edible plants, however, can help you fill that gap. I think there's definitely been some folks talking about morels in the chat. I think RBL's been getting all kinds of morels. Wild greens and some fungi can be an important source of nutrients at this time of year. In that article, they took a look at 24 common edible wild plants and a couple of shrooms that you can look for around this time of year. The other one from this month gets really interesting. Day 1 of 12 days of eating weeds, and it begins with dandelion, and there are 11 more. How many? So here's the good question, not only for Castbot and I, but for all of y'all. How many items on this list of the 24 and the 12 are things that you can find in your own neck of the woods? And again, huge thanks to Castbot. I was eating dandelion heads from our yard on some salmon the other day. It is the Mounsey Minute, Episode 4, Eating Weeds.
This is Gavin Mounsey for Media Monarchy. I'm author of Recipes for Reciprocity, The Regenerative Way from Seed to Table, and this is the Mounsey Minute. I want to build on last month's emergency preparedness and universal skill sets, so this month I'm going to be sharing 24 wild foods you can forage for in 2024. Before I share the list, I just wanted to be real and give an honest assessment of the current state of affairs. We live in a time when our economies are being manipulated. There's scamdemic bailouts, there's inflation out of control, the grocery store bills are skyrocketing, and yet many people aren't taking advantage of all the wild abundance around us. In a time when our food at the grocery store is full of poison and often covered in pesticides, learning how to identify plants in the forest or even in our own yards can give us a huge advantage. Learning to identify plants that have been characterized as weeds by corporate agriculture and other propaganda systems helps us not only to attain nutrition for our bodies in emergencies or everyday life, but also shows us indicators for the soil conditions in our garden. Whether it's through laziness or people having a sort of food snobbery conditioning where they have bought into the propaganda of big ag and they think that the only good food to eat is at the grocery store, a lot of people aren't taking advantage of all the beautiful food around us growing in the forests and the fields in our own yards. I created a Substack article that's got in-depth info on each one of the items that's going to be listed. So if you go there, you can see ideas for recipes, nutritional and medicinal benefits. And without further ado, here's the 24 foods. Number 1, hostas. Hostas may be seen as an ornamental plant here in North America, but in Japan it's actually a traditional seasonal food that's eaten a lot like asparagus. I love to harvest them before the leaves have opened up, when the shoots are just coming out of the ground, to thin out the ones in our yard. I use them in fermentation to make tasty pickles, and sometimes I'll make kimchi out of them. Number 2, fiddlehead ferns or ostrich ferns. 3, wild violets. 4, dandelions. I love to use the little flower buds as they just start to emerge. Instead of capers in fermentation, I'll use the greens in soups and in smoothies, and when the flowers become ripe, you can use them to make dandelion wine. 5, stinging nettle. Now this is one of my favorites. You can use it instead of spinach. It's nutritionally superior to spinach. You could use it in dishes like soups. You can mix it in with your pasta. I like to make mushroom and nettle ravioli, and sometimes I'll dry them and use it later for tea. It's packed full of minerals that are great for your bones, and it'll actually help with allergies. 6, chickweed. You'll find this stuff growing around your yard if you're in the temperate zone, and it's great if added to a salad. 7, clover. Clover can be made into a really nice tea and is especially beneficial to women where it helps balance hormone levels. 8, cattail shoots and pollen. Cattails are known as the ultimate survival plant. Every part of the plant is edible in some way. 9, ramps or wild leeks.
Aw, shit.
These are one of my favorites. They're kind of endangered around our area, so I don't take the bulbs, but rather I take just the leaves so the plants can regenerate. I collect the seeds and I spread them around the forest so more patches can grow. They have a really lovely garlicky flavor. You can add them to soups or ferments, and they're just an all-around great addition to the kitchen. 10, wild asparagus. 11, dead nettle. 12, garlic mustard. 13, Willow. 14. Yarrow. Yarrow is one of my new favorites. I discovered how it has mosquito-repelling properties when I was hiking up in the high alpine last year. And basically, you can make it into a tea. It's highly nutritious. It has a nice, rich flavor. And if you ever get a nasty wound, you can mush it up and rub it in the wound, and it'll stop the bleeding. 15. Plantain. 16. Spruce tips or pine tips. These are another new one of my favorites. I love snacking on them just as they emerge. Every species of pine has edible tips, so when you see those tips pushing out, they're vitamin C rich, they're tangy and citrusy. You can eat them fresh or you can fry them up. There's a lot of different potentials for those nutritious foods. 17. Ground elder. Not to be confused with elderberry. There's more information on my Substack article on how to identify it. 18. Fat hen or lamb's quarter. 19. Henbit. 20. Burdock. 21.
Ooh.
Birch leaf tea or birch syrup. Birch leaf tea is very nourishing and has quite a few medicinal properties, and birch syrup, similar to maple syrup, has a rich, sweet flavor and can carry the nutrition in the summer months. 22. Oyster mushrooms. 23. King Bolette or porcini mushrooms. And last but not least, 24. Morel mushrooms. I hope this inspires some of you to get out there in your local neighborhood and forest and do some of your own foraging. Until next time, happy foraging, everyone.
Why lawns? Have you ever asked yourself, why do we even have front lawns in the first place? People rarely use that space to enjoy with their family playing/picnicking outside anymore, and yet they spend large amounts of time and money maintaining them. The history of front lawns. In the 17th century in England, we first saw the deliberate growing of trimmed grass by the wealthy and the aristocracy as a show of affluence. During those times, land was a valuable resource as it was used to grow food, which provided a source of nutrition and a source of income. For a wealthy landowner to simply grow grass was a show of extravagance, flaunting the fact that they had land to waste as they pleased. The enormity of such a status symbol may not be immediately obvious to us in our current day and age until we realize that lawn mowers did not exist at the time. These lawns were cut by hand, by servants using scythes, sickles, and shears. The amount of labor involved in maintaining a large lawn was considerable, and only the wealthiest in society could afford to pay people to carry out this work. After the lawnmower was invented, having a lawn no longer remained the mark of wealth and status that it once was, but this status symbol now became accessible to the masses. From that time onward, we've just kept on growing lawns in our front yards, forgetting that they were once grown as a symbol of wealth. Just another one of those unquestioned traditions that people blindly follow without knowing why. Essentially, hundreds of years ago, grassy lawns originally became popular to prove a person was wealthy enough to waste land rather than farm on it. Here are some of the reasons we need to stop obsessing over perfect lawns and make the move to regenerative gardening. Noise and air pollution. Lawn mowers and similar equipment account for 5% of air pollution and a fair amount of the noise pollution as well. Water wastage. Lawns require lots of water to maintain their perfect green color, accounting for 30 to 60% of all urban freshwater usage. Generally, the more that an area is water insecure or stressed, the more that lawns and landscaping contribute to the problem by relying on the already limited water supply to not shrivel and die. Water supply. The water supply in the ground is then poisoned as the toxins seep into our groundwater, into our tap water, and then into us through various ways. Even if you don't drink tap water, we bath, shower, or swim in it most often. The skin is our largest organ and absorbs toxins quite easily. Higher concentration of poisons. Homeowners spend billions of dollars and use 10 times the amount of pesticide and fertilizers per acre on their lawns as farmers do on crops. Even though agricultural land takes up much more space than lawns, pesticide usage in urban areas is far more concentrated. Toxic toll on pollinators. The poisons sprayed on lawns are killing other plants/weeds that bees need to survive. As well, studies have shown that the bees are picking up the toxins, which is killing them directly, as well as the bees are spreading the toxins around. Pets, wildlife, and children. While they may tell us to stay off the lawn for a few days after spraying, the poison doesn't just disappear. Our pets, wildlife, and children end up absorbing the poison by just touching the lawn after. Soil. Monocrops such as grass destroy the soil. Regenerative gardening and permaculture design repairs the soil. Clearly, lawns are not the answer, even if you take the poisons out. The issues with pollinators from removing the other plants/weeds, wasting water, and the destruction of the soil are still problematic. It's time to grow food, my friends. Wouldn't you rather look out at a bunch of vegetables, fruits, and flowers growing in your garden than a wide expanse of grass you have to constantly take care of that doesn't feed you anything? As explained above at the beginning of the post, some of us would face significant pushback if we went all out overtly veggie gardening in the front yard, as is shown in the pics above, and taking on the armies of lawn Nazis and grass Gestapo to defend our veggie patch could quickly turn into a full-time job, and perhaps financially draining endeavor if the corrupt court system got involved. I take my hat off to the audacious and unapologetic regenerative revolutionaries that are tearing up their whole front lawn and creating beautiful veggie, berry, and herb beds despite the prevailing monoculture thinking in their neighborhood. Some of us would like to take steps in that direction and do it in a way that takes a path of less friction by disguising our sod sedition efforts in flowers and other seemingly ornamental plants which can also feed us and our loved ones. Thus, the following material will provide actionable intel for the aspiring covert food and medicine gardeners, so we can all become effective agents of sod satyagraha.
About covert food gardening in the age of front lawn fanaticism. So I'm going to provide some tips and key species that I like to use for designing a garden out front that can provide food and medicine. Now this is effective whether you just want to stack functions and have something that looks beautiful as well as provides for yourself and your loved ones, or if you live in a municipality like mine that actually has Orwellian laws that have drones flying around making sure people are only growing lawn in their front yard and fining you if you don't. I have an article I put together on Substack that has an extensive list of ideal species of trees, shrubs, and plants that can be used in a covert food garden, but I'll go over a few key species here that I like to use, which are really versatile. First up, amaranth. Amaranth is the original rebel outlaw grain. Back in the day when Cortez and all his thugs came from Spain over to Central America, they made it outlawed to grow amaranth because it was such an effective food crop for the indigenous peoples there, and if you were caught growing amaranth, they would chop your hand off. So as a nod to those people, and because the crop is just so versatile, it provides protein in the seeds, a lot of leafy greens, you can use the leaves for vegetables, and it just looks beautiful too. I like to grow amaranth out front in my yard. I'll put it in front of the ugly electrical box we have and block that out. One of the first times I actually saw amaranth around here was in front of a dental office. They had it in one of the ornamental gardens. So it's already been installed into the landscaping business, so it'll be a perfect incognito food crop you can grow out front. Next up, serviceberry. Now, there's a lot of different varieties of serviceberries. There's Saskatoon serviceberries that are the most cold-hardy one. They grow all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And then there's ones like Allegheny serviceberry that can grow up to Zone 8. They can grow as a shrub or they can grow as a small tree. They have really beautiful white flowers in the spring, so they're used as an ornamental and landscaping business. And they also provide nutrient-dense berries that are delicious and have anti-cancer compounds in them. Next up, echinacea, or coneflower. It's been used by the indigenous peoples in North America for many centuries. It's got powerful medicinal compounds in the roots, the stems, and the flowers, and they're very long-lived perennials. So once you plant them, they can grow for many decades, and you can continually harvest for making potent medicine, for optimizing your immune system, and many other parts of your body. And they're beautiful, and the pollinators love them too. And last but not least, elderberry. Elderberries are great in the ornamental landscaping business. You can plant them for the beautiful white flowers, and some of the varieties have colorful foliage. And then, of course, you get those anthocyanin-rich purple berries that you can make into a wide range of different medicines and preserves. And they're a great mid-sized shrub. You can either prune it back or you can let it become a full hedge. And I get like 20, 30 pounds of berries out of my front yard driveway each year just by growing a hedge of those. And they pass off as ornamentals, but they provide me potent medicine and food. As James Corbett pointed out in his excellent series on the future of food, food can be used as a weapon by the institutions and the powers that be, but we can also use it as a tool to engage in satyagraha, or peaceful resistance against tyranny. Each of us can do our part, and every bit counts. Now, if you live in the city in an apartment or a townhome and you don't have a front lawn, I provided some information in the article so you could even get involved in growing some of your own food, whether you're doing it in a community garden, engaging in guerrilla gardening, or guerrilla grafting, or growing some mushrooms at home. There's plenty of different ideas that I include on there so you guys can get going too and join the rebellion against the food world order. Until next time, happy seed starting and long live the regenerative resistance. Since then, I've been working on writing articles for my next book, studying the forest as a way to connect with the natural abundance in nature. So let me take you on a little field trip to the forest where I've been doing some field research. This is an old growth shagbark hickory. We're here in southern Ontario, and this is one of the amazing trees you can grow in food forest designs that could grow well underneath super canopy trees like white pine, tulip trees, and a long time ago, the American chestnut. This tree can live for hundreds of years, and this one's already well over 100. It can produce nuts for 200 years plus. They resemble pecans, and you can also grow other trees in the proximity like pawpaws, and then understory herbs and shrubs like wild leeks and ginseng. So this can be part of a long-term, multi-storied food production system we can give to future generations. Here I have a slideshow offering a range of different pictures of shagbark hickory growing in their natural climate, from summer production into the fall dormancy. Towards the end of this slideshow, you can see some very old growth hickory trees that are well over 100 years old. Here I offer a few pictures that show both hickory seeds that are encased in their shell casings, as well as hickory seeds that have removed the shell casings, and then hickory nuts that have had the shell removed, ready to eat. For some excellent information on this particular species of tree, I highly suggest checking out Akiva Silver's book called Trees of Power, 10 Essential Arboreal Allies. Now you can see a number of the pages here from his book that pertain to this species in particular, and some nuts that he sent me which had excellent germination rates, so you can tell he knows what he's talking about. At the end of the slideshow, you can see I have a shagbark hickory seedling in an air pruning bed. Now these are ideal for starting shagbark hickory and other taprooted seedlings such as oak and pawpaw, because what happens is when the taproot reaches the bottom of the bed, it senses the air, it stops growing the taproot, and it grows fibrous roots around the main taproot. This allows the plant to be tucked in for the winter or put into pots and have an intact taproot for planting out the next season. If you look for these trees up in the northern areas of the Norfolk County of Ontario and by Lake Huron, you'll find unnaturally high concentrations of these trees alongside many other food and medicine plants that were planted by indigenous peoples hundreds of years ago. So this tree was used in regenerative agroforestry as part of Ontario's ancient history. This is something we can learn from for producing food in the future, using low maintenance, no pesticides, no tilling food species. You can learn more about shagbark hickory if you check out my article on Substack. If you want to learn more about shagbark hickory, how you can cultivate it in the regenerative garden or in the food forest, you can check the description section under the video and you'll find an in-depth article on this species. Here we are in one of the very last intact old-growth Carolinian forests in southern Ontario. Now why that's significant is as someone who's studying regenerative agroforestry or food forest design, I can come here and see nature's original design structure for how these trees grow together with each other. And when I find trees like this tulip tree here, which provides medicine for people, as well as nectar for bees, and I find the shagbark hickory, and I find the black walnut, and I find the beech, and many others, I can see how they integrate themselves with different trees, emulate that in my food forest designs, and then build on that, adding other stacked functions like growing mushrooms underneath. It's the largest fruit native to North America, and the only fruit tree ever to escape the tropics. Thanks to the help of indigenous horticulturalists over the centuries, we now have access here all the way in southern Ontario to the pawpaw, aka Asamana triloba. This tree is a really amazing tree in the food forest because you can plant it actually in the partial shade of other trees and it still gives you a good amount of fruit. If you check out my post on Substack, you'll find lots of detailed information that's going to help you to be able to source out pawpaw seedlings or grow them all the way from seed yourself. Basically, the tree, when it's younger, from ages like 1 to 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, prefers a bit of a part shade. It actually needs protection from the strong sun. So what I found is that if I can put the seedlings up against a south-facing fence and protect them from the strong sun and just allow some sun to come through the slats of the wood, then they get acclimatized by the time they get 6 feet tall, and then they really go for it in the full sun at year 3 or 4. Pawpaw has a long and illustrious history in American culture, where in the travels of Lewis and Clark, they were eating the fruit Mark Twain was a favorite of his. And when people escaped the slave plantations and they were going north to Canada, it was a helpful food for them on their journeys. Now, if you've never had a pawpaw fruit before, imagine a fruit the size of a mango that smells like the most tropical exotic fruit. When you cut it in half, you have a rich, sweet, custard-textured flesh that has a flavor profile somewhere between banana, papaya, pear, strawberry, and jackfruit, depending on the variety. Another thing that's really great about this tree is that the foliage and the bark are not desired by deer or rabbits. So where you're facing a lot of pressure from your four-legged friends, they're not really going to pay much attention to your pawpaw seedlings. And in addition to that, were places where they have black walnuts growing and they're exuding that allelopathic chemical jugulone through their roots, suppressing the growth of other plants, pawpaws can actually grow quite well in direct proximity to black walnut trees. Nutritionally speaking, pawpaws are vitamin-packed with antioxidants. Pawpaw pulp contains all essential amino acids and in higher concentrations than apples, bananas, or oranges. It's full of vitamins and minerals, exceeding peaches, grapes, and apples. It is exceptionally high in potassium, calcium, vitamin C, niacin, phosphorus, iron, zinc, copper, and magnesium. The medicinal actions offered by the plant include antimicrobial, antioxidant, anti-proliferative, which means preventing the growth of cancer cells in the human body, cardioprotective, and tonifying properties. This species can grow in cold hardiness zones 4 to 9, and if you are going to try and source out some seeds from a fresh fruit, just make sure you don't let the seeds dry out, because pawpaw seeds, a lot like apple seeds, are called recalcitrant, which means they have to retain their moisture for the embryo to stay alive inside the seed. So if you do harvest the seeds and you want to save them to the following season before planting, you'd want to put them in a fridge in like a moist towel after washing off all the flesh and simulate winter conditions in the fridge before taking them out to warm up for germination. Or you could ideally just plant them right out the final location where they're supposed to germinate and let them naturally go through the winter cycle. The Latin genus name for this fruit comes from the Ojibwe word for pawpaw, asimin. Pawpaw's importance to indigenous peoples on Turtle Island is reflected not solely archaeologically, but in folklore and linguistics. There's a town in Louisiana called Natchitoches, which translates to the pawpaw eaters, and is derived from the name given by the Caddo people. Archaeological evidence indicates that indigenous people, such as the Onondaga, introduced the tree to southern Ontario about 400 years ago. George Washington planted pawpaws at his home in Mount Vernon in 1785, and more recently, in 1806, the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition subsisted almost entirely on wild pawpaws for several days. When their party was out of provisions, they had to survive on what was growing locally, and that was the pawpaw fruit. If you check out my article on pawpaw trees on Substack, you'll find more elaborated information on the health benefits, as well as all the functions that this tree can provide in the wilderness and in the food forest. You'll also find some fun recipes that you can use if you start to grow your own pawpaws, such as pawpaw ice cream and pawpaw mead. Okay, that's it for me this month, guys. I hope this inspires you to get out there and try some pawpaws, maybe try cultivating your own tree.
Also, Gavin has a post describing the series he is doing on ideal species for regenerative agroforestry and exploring their medicinal properties, which will become the backbone of his next book, Stacking Functions in the Garden, Food Forest, and the Medicine Cabinet, the regenerative way from seed to apothecary. He sent us seeds, Casbot is growing them, as pawpaws are slow to start, but easy to grow.
This is an eastern white pine. Now this is a middle-aged tree, probably about 80 feet tall and maybe just over 100 years old. These trees, when they're allowed to reach their mature state, can actually reach almost 3 times that height, 240 feet. About in the year 1840, the records show that when the original trees were logged from the shores of Lake Erie, they were getting multiple trees that were 8 feet in diameter and 220 to 240 feet. Now because of something called generational amnesia, or shifting baseline syndrome, people that are born today in southern Ontario see big white pines like this and they think this is an old growth tree. Now, in reality, the majority of the climax trees were clear-cut in the name of colonization and providing ship mass to the British Navy in the 1800s. But there are still a few old growth groves left if you go up to Algonquin. They weren't quite as big as the ones on the shore of Lake Erie, but you can still get an idea. Now these trees were the super canopy trees in this Carolinian forest, providing nesting habitat for eagles, hawks, and providing medicine for humans. You can use the needles to make a nutrient-dense tea with vitamin C and shikimic acid for helping your immune system. And there's a number of other things that this tree can be used for without harming the tree, such as basket weaving and many other things. If you want to learn more about eastern white pines in the context of regenerative agroforestry or food forest design, check out the link in the description section to find an in-depth article that covers the species. Here we are in one of the last little pockets of old growth forest left in southern Ontario, and this here is a kingnut, otherwise known as a shellbark hickory. They're quite uncommon here in the south of Ontario because they were targeted for logging earlier on in the settlement phase, but they're actually a tree that was known by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and those members of it like the Wendat and the Huron as the anti-famine tree. So where this tree was planted and tended in great numbers as part of their food forest designs, no human ever starved. These trees produce a copious amount of nutrient-dense nuts that offer healthy fats, minerals, vitamins, and medicinal compounds that prevent neurodegenerative diseases and cancer. So when the French settlers came, the Jesuit priests, and the military officers, they found there was very little of those diseases that were plaguing their European populations back home, and they were surprised when they shared what one of their main food sources was that they'd stashed and collected in their baskets over the winter. It was the kingnut. So this is one of these trees that we can team up with to build food resilience for our communities. These trees can live well over 200 years, being productive for over a century and producing copious amounts of food with very little inputs, no synthetic fertilizer, no irrigation required, just abundance. And it's a mother tree, so it brings in biodiversity and supporting the other non-human beings that are part of our communities too. Now I go around in the winter looking for these trees. I look for the signs, which is these beautiful big nut casings that are a lot bigger than their shagbark cousins. And that's an indicator that this one had a mast year recently, dropping copious amounts of food on the forest floor. And that means I can come back in the future, I can collect the seeds for propagating, maybe do some foraging, and make sure that these trees go on into the future to feed the 7th generation that comes after us. In Diana Bursford Kroger's new book called Our Green Heart, she talks about this tree, otherwise known as the kingnut or the shellbark, and how it can provide food resilience for our future and help to bring stabilization to the soil and our ecosystems. In her chapter called The Magic of the Kingnut, she says, "I have a scientific interest in the walnut. In particular, hickories. This genus, Caria, consists of a small pool of 20 to 25 species worldwide. The walnut has had an intense relationship with the terroir of the Americas for a long, long time. The solar exposure on the two continents is very strong. The evidence of this photonic abundance is seen in the crop of nuts these trees produce every year. Every aspect of the walnut's comfortable ride in the sun is unique to these trees. I look for kingnut regularly in my travels. It is an easy tree to spot, even at a great distance, because the bark curls. The mature kingnut is a feast for the eyes. Long plates of its bark become repelled by its cambium and curl into 6-foot lengths. It is said that where these trees grow as mature mother trees, they are among some of the last left in Canada. Diana, one bright morning, received a small box that had been sent by express by one of the rangers from the Windsor area. She opened it and to her delight found 5 kingnuts beaming up at her from the protection of their light brown winter overcoats. Let me describe these magnificent anti-famine nut trees. They like to have bur oak as companions for life. The kingnut can grow in a wide range of soils, from dry and sandy to river bottom. A nearby spring or standing pool of water will not deter them. The tree is shorter than its sibling, the shagbark. The kingnut is also stouter, with much heavier branches. The leaves are bigger and give a much better shade. And the tree wears a winter dress of the dry connecting points where the leaves would connect onto last year's growth. The kingnut can also hybridize with the pecan to make much bigger nut meats. Once upon a time in the not so distant past, The food of the walnut family, including the hickories, fed North America. Thriving on this bounty was the American mound builder culture and the great savanna food forest builders of here in Ontario. Rolling plains of meadows interspersed with food-bearing trees. This culture's creative and scientific abilities far surpassed the efforts of any European culture of that time. And it successfully fed its people on forest food. The nut trees soaked up the sun, just like grass-fed beef, and spilled the 3 essential fatty acids into food that was twinned with health in body and mind. The king nut was central to its food chain, the American giant of food production. People called it the anti-famine tree, because where these trees matured and grew, famine did not exist. It is a medicine tree of great importance. The pharmacopoeia of the Cherokee people alone employed the medicine of this tree for pain relief, viral remedies, and the extraordinary ability of a bark infusion to improve the suppleness of long bones and prevent injury in various sports. And by the wilderness gardening of these nut trees of the savanna, they were able to harvest nuts to deliver the high-quality, first-class protein into their diet, doubling the protein from the venison. Today, king nut could be reintroduced as an aid to agriculture in North America. If it is planted in hedgerows, the trees would shade the fields from excessive ultraviolet exposure from the sun. The tree's roots would recycle the subsoil mineral, wealth, back into the surface layer of the soil. King nuts make the ecology of the soil habitat around them more stable for insect life. Pollinators can tap abundant supplies of food and resins for protection. Some of the insects and a few birds that use the resins as antibiotic and antifungal wallpaper to protect their offspring as they develop. They form a housekeeping that keeps diseases at bay. Birds multiply in the tree's presence, ingesting the vitamin D vital for egg production while preening in the canopy. The king nut's large leaves sweep the air of particulate pollution, including isotopic radioactive reductions, and their shade protects amphibians from genetic damage. These trees, so carelessly removed from the North American landscape, are capable of doubling the plant-based protein of any farming operation. Making nut milks, nut creams, nut cheeses, and nut tofu can be a new industry for the farming community. In addition, recent research from the District of Southern India has shown that old-style growing of woody perennials like the king nut alongside agricultural crops can increase carbon dioxide sequestration from the atmosphere by 34%. What benefits nature benefits farms. What benefits farms benefits humanity. The king nut is a gift. We have only to accept it. This here is an old-growth tulip tree, one of the tallest members of the Carolinian forest. It can provide medicine for humans as well as habitat for birds of prey, and if you have bees, the amount of nectar these flowers produce is amazing. And this is a wild pawpaw tree. This tree is one of the trees that you can grow as an understory tree underneath your super canopy trees like tulip trees and your nut trees like shagbark hickory. So we create a multi-storied ecosystem that's producing food for humans as well as habitat for non-human beings. And it's something we can gift to future generations. That's going to be the focus of my next book, allowing people and communities to create resilient food production systems that align seamlessly with the abundance of nature. I've been working on applying these concepts in my local community, and I can't share too many details on a project I'm working on yet, but these images give you a hint. We're here today to talk about seed saving, why it's important for ourselves in our residences and our communities, and all the benefits it can provide to us in our lives. Now, seed saving has a great many reasons why it can be very powerful in a garden or in the context of a farm, especially in today's world when we're dealing with erratic weather conditions, unstable food supply lines, and the nutrition of our food going down steadily due to degenerative agricultural practices and the genetic modification of seeds. So what happens when we save seeds over multiple generations is that they become genetically acclimatized to the specific region in which they're growing. And that happens over a natural process, so there's built-in resilience into the seed against, let's say, drought or cold or diseases. So many heirloom seed varieties that we can save and we can get from other cultures, they have built-in resilience against the conditions we're facing today. And not only that, because they are been saved over multiple generations, they've had selected for traits such as flavor, nutrition, and color. So we really get a vibrant spectrum of antioxidants and nutrients in our food when we save seeds from heirloom seeds versus buying hybridized or genetically modified seeds, which are bred for uniformity and for their traits such as being able to spray them with various chemicals and for them to survive. So saving heirloom seed is an amazing way to increase our food security in times when food supply lines and financial instability and agricultural instability is becoming the norm.
So after I'd heard the corporations talk about their future, I said, I'm going to save seeds. And I took inspiration from Gandhi's spinning wheel, realizing that the British Empire ran on control over the textile industry and the raw material for the textile industry. And the living seed was being reduced to raw material for the biotechnology industry. Because you don't invent the seed, you take it from somewhere. Usually you just steal it. And so much of my life has gone in dealing with what I call biopiracy. Now, seed exchange has always happened. Exchange is not piracy. But you come to me and you take the seed, and then you patent it, and say, I created it, and now you pay me royalty. That's biopiracy. Sadly, this idea of a totally constructed intellectual property in seed and life is being pushed very, very hard, and it is having very high costs. I don't know how many of you are aware, because of patents on seed, on GMO seeds, American farmers are spending $10 billion extra for royalty. Because that's the main intention of genetically engineered seeds, to collect a royalty. In India, I won't give you the long story of what happened to India's cotton, but before globalization, before Monsanto entered the country, seed was, if it was a farmer's own seed, it was zero cost. If it had been bought from a public institution or a local company, it was 5 rupees or 10 rupees a kilogram of seed. Monsanto enters with 450-gram packages, 1,600 rupees. It's more than 3,600 for a kilogram. And as a Monsanto representative said to a parliamentary committee that was investigating the crisis related to GMOs, they said, yeah, half of it is royalty collection. Now, can you imagine? Here's the seed that's growing and evolving. Here are farmers who have worked to evolve that seed. They're doing the hard work in the field, and the royalties come to Monsanto. There's been so many investigations on the banking system. There have been so many investigations on Ponzi schemes of all kinds. One thing that hasn't been investigated, and I hope the amazing institutions that are hosting this lecture will get into this. Intellectual property rights on seed, patents on seed are a Ponzi scheme. Of course, this Ponzi scheme is upheld with claims of miracles from GMOs. The first claim being that they produce more food and the world will go hungry. There'll be 10 billion people on the planet, and without GMOs you won't have food. Because of GMOs we don't have food. Only 10% of the GMO corn and soya, which accounts for the largest expansion of acreage in the world in the recent years, only 10% goes for food. The UN data has clarified that 70% of the food we eat comes from small farms. And I would assume that if we add the gardens, urban gardens, organic farms, we would have figures that would cross 80%. So in fact, the industrial system is a minority system when it comes to food security. But it is the major system that is causing both the ecological crisis as well as the crisis of democracy. I think the first thing to recognize about hunger is that today it's a rural phenomena. It's mainly in third world countries, and it's mainly among communities that are actually agricultural communities. So why are people who are growing food going hungry themselves? They're going hungry because everything they have grown has to be sold in order to pay for the costly seeds and the costly chemicals. So a high cost, chemical intensive agriculture is a recipe for hunger. Secondly, the models of agriculture that chemical farming has promoted are monocultures. Monocultures are nutritionally impoverished. The same acre of land, using biodiversity, using organic and ecological methods, could produce 5 to 10 times more nutrition than a monoculture can. So maximizing the production of commodities for international trade is directly proportionate to the decrease in nutrition availability to local communities, which is why hunger grows. The world has to be fed. It has to be fed by growing food locally, to be used locally as the biggest proportion of the food basket. Some elements will be traded internationally, but what is traded internationally should not be staple foods. What is traded internationally should be that extra flavor of spices from India and coffee from Guatemala. That's all right. But to turn the world into a dependency on staples has nothing to do with feeding the world. It has a lot to do with controlling the food supply. The United States evolved a phrase during the Vietnam War, and the phrase was food as a weapon. The use of food as the ultimate weapon of control. And the tragedy is the growth of agribusiness in the US has gone hand in hand with the US foreign policy to deliberately create hunger locally in order to make the world dependent on food supplies, through which you can then control countries and their decision-making ability. So hunger has become an instrument of war. And food responding to that artificially created hunger is an instrument of war. Peace means you grow food locally, you grow food with peace, you grow food non-violently, and the countries that are today the worst victims of hunger could be the highest producer of food. Africa has the largest land per human being, per capita. Africa is an abundant continent, and yet because of the deliberate policies, it has today been turned into a continent of hunger. India, which has the best soils, the best monsoons, the highest biodiversity, should not have any problem. We are growing enough food, and yet 70% of our children are going hungry because the economic system is robbing them of their right to food. So food production must once again be an issue of sustainability, taking care of the earth, and the human right to food must be an inalienable right. These rights cannot be ensured through a marketplace where food has become a commodity and a subject of speculation. We saw what speculation did in 2008. Food prices doubled, and the companies that control the food system doubled their profits, while riots took place in 40 countries.
The act of saving seed from your heirloom garden crops is an act of love and hope for tomorrow. Not only does this act save one money and ensure food security for one's household and local community, but it also offers one the unique sense of satisfaction that comes from the knowing that each successive year, your varieties of seeds that are saved are becoming more and more acclimatized to the region in which you're growing them, more well suited to grow in your garden and your community. That's the natural process inherent in seeds adapting over multiple generations. something that we've lost a lot in recent years when there is hybridization and lab manipulation of seeds going on, and they don't have their natural ability to adapt. The same for grafted and cloned plants. So saving seeds from heirloom open pollinated seeds offers Mother Nature the opportunity to do what she does best, which is adapt and provide us with the most nutrient dense and beautiful food possible. Saving seed is an act of co-creating with the forces of nature. It is an act of faith, for it means holding the hope in our hearts that each spring we will plant these seeds and share the resulting abundance with our family and friends. I often find that the act of processing seeds in the fall or in the winter can also provide a kind of therapy of its own. As you rub the seed pods together with your hands, sometimes it releases aromas if you're saving seeds from basil, let's say, and then you get to use your time to separate those little living embryos and preserve them for the next generation. I find it a very rewarding act to do in the cold months of winter. Such is the power of saving heirloom seeds and investing in the living economy of the earth with our hands and our hearts. This simple act is an investment that provides exponential gifts in one's life. Holding the seeds saved from your garden in your hand, you can sense the living echoes that are the hard work of all the previous generations that came from before you, and how you are honoring the work that they put into making those seeds what they are, and ensuring that those same gifts can be appreciated by future generations. Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about the joy and the gratitude that comes from gardening and saving seeds by saying, while expressing gratitude seems innocent enough, it is a revolutionary idea. In a consumer society, gratitude is a radical proposition. Recognizing abundance rather than scarcity undermines an economy that thrives by creating unmet desires. Gratitude cultivates an ethic of fullness, but the economy needs emptiness. Therefore, by investing in the living economy through saving and sharing seeds and planting them in the garden, we are investing in the ethic of fullness and a future of abundance. Seeds are little living embryos, housing vast genetic libraries which connect us to our past and offer boundless potential for the future. When saving seed is combined with the act of composting, it essentially means you are contributing towards the fabric of an ancient, decentralized economic model. In the compost bin, we invest our time and waste materials, and the asset managers and investment strategy team, comprised of myriad bacteria, fungi, and decomposing insects, invest and transform that time and material into molecules of biological currency for us, storing those units of currency in the form of fertile soil. We can then withdraw from our account using the key code that is embodied in a living heirloom seed, which unlocks our savings account and allows us to access our investment in the form of life-giving food, medicine, oxygen, and poetry for the senses. Thus, when you combine the act of saving seed with composting to build soil, you are essentially connecting your own health and resilience to the ancient sacred economy of the living earth. And therefore, you will be able to nourish yourself and your loved ones while also giving back to the earth, regardless of the state of the human economy or your bank account. Through offering our hands to protect and preserve heirloom seeds, and also accelerate the natural cycles inherent in composting, we involve ourselves in the sacred act of reciprocity, and begin to nourish a reciprocal relationship with the living earth that results in true wealth.